And welcome back to Hannity. We are on the ground in Israel. We are in Tel Aviv tonight, and we continue now with more of my exclusive interview with the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Because of your geographical location, surrounded by many enemies, and you're here in the Middle East, and we could run off the list: Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Hezbollah, you have Muslim Brotherhood, you have ISIS, you have Al-Qaeda, a lot of groups, radical Islam. You have no choice. You have to understand radical Islam. Do you think the world, even in a post 9/11 world, I wonder at times if people know the extent of the threat of radical Islam?
I hope they do. I mean, the evidence is abundant. What you have right now is this terrific conflagration in the Middle East. You have ISIS taking swaths of the Iraq, in Syria. It's now pushing into right close to Lebanon and perhaps into Jordan. That's very, very dangerous. And ISIS is basically a sister movement of Al-Qaeda. You have Hezbollah, radical Shiites fighting radical Sunnis. You have Hamas, and you have in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and in North Africa.
Radicalism is on the rise.
Plethora of Islamist terrorist groups. Now, look, they're all fighting among themselves, but they all agree that once they vanquish their Muslim moderates who are there, who don't share their views, and they behead them and do horrible things to them. And then they have to get to Israel, which is the western country in the region.
You always hear wipe Israel off the map.
Yeah, always, but we're the small Satan. For all of them, you're the great Satan. The radical Shiites are backed by Iran. The radical Sunnis have various backers and so on. And these people fight among themselves who'll be the king of the hill. But one thing they agree on, it's going to be an Islamist hill. And it's going to be a world dominated by their unforgiving creed, their violent ideology, which rejects modernity, rejects human rights, puts women as chattel. All minorities are subjugated or eliminated. I mean, it is a terrible, terrible worldview, with these competing sects who want to enforce it on the rest of humanity. Those of humanity will be left alive. A good portion will be destroyed. Now, this is the danger, that you have 21st century weapons with early medieval doctrines here, wedded together, and this is a great danger for the world. Israel is on the front line facing this terrible force and should be given support. And who is the world supporting? Is it supporting Hamas, a terrorist tyranny of the worst kind that is cruel to not only to us but to its own people? Or is it supporting this vibrant, beleaguered democracy Israel that is trying to legitimately defend itself? And I think everybody should ask themselves that question, because by supporting Israel, you're supporting yourself.
See, I agree with your analysis. The marriage of radicalism and weapons of mass destruction has got to be viewed as the world's greatest threat. You know, one thing we're witnessing with the rise of radicalism, you talk about the Middle East and North Africa and all the different groups, and then of course we have Iran on the side, which I want to ask you about. And then look at, it somewhat surprised me in this conflict that there was not enough moral clarity on the part of some people, some nations. We saw a rise of anti-Semitism in France, Germany, even Great Britain, and in the United States in small sectors. Because Hamas's charter is very clear. It says Israel will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it. It goes on to say the Prophet, Allah, God bless and grant him salvation, the day of judgment will not come until the Muslims fight the Jews, kill the Jews. When the Jew goes behind stones and trees, the stones and trees will say, "O Muslims, O Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come kill him." And I can read much more. I'm sure you're very aware of their charter. So the question is, you see the rise of radicalism, you see the rise of anti-Semitism, you read Hamas's charter, and throughout this conflict you hear you have got to have a ceasefire. You cannot defend yourself.
Well, I think a lot of people say that support Israel's right to exist, and I think they do. They support Israel's right to defend itself, but they actually, in practice, refuse to let Israel exercise that right, because I know that's not the U.S. position, and the U.S. has been very clear about that, including from President Obama down. He said, No country can tolerate rockets into our cities. No country can tolerate these terror tunnels dug into our communities. And we have the right to act in self-defense, and we do. And I think that's important. But there are others in the international community who, unlike the United States or Canada or Australia, and some very courageous people in Europe, who stood up with Israel and elsewhere in the world. There are some who say, well, yeah, you have a right of self-defense, but if they fire at you from densely populated urban areas, you really don't have a right to defend yourself, because some civilians will be killed. In other words, borrowing on that example that I took of the British Air Force bombing the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, no, you cannot bomb the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen, or you cannot fight the German army because they're embedded in civilian areas. You'd never have conquered Normandy and gone on to Berlin if you accepted that view. You don't give immunity to terrorists because they're hiding in civilian areas while rocketing your civilian areas.
And coming up, the last part of my interview with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, the Prime Minister responds to the rise in anti-Semitism around the globe, and he issues a warning about Iran that the entire world needs to hear. That and much more as Hannity continues from Tel Aviv tonight.